Today I stand in front of you a woman that's made a decision to no longer let the most painful parts in her body go untreated. Medical professionals say that if a pain lasts longer than 3 days, it could be abnormal to get it checked out. So today I want to ask you, have you ever received a bad diagnosis? News you weren't anticipating? Circumstances that left you breathless? Having heart palpitations? That's exactly what happened to me the moment I began to present my point of view on the anatomy of oppression. I'll be honest, I'm not in the medical field, but as a true researcher, I wanted to do my due diligence. So as I put oppression into the search engine and began to read the text, to my surprise, I hadn't just come across the definition, but I felt as if I had received a bad diagnosis. Words like abuse, neglect, persecution, pain, and suffering left me with the conclusion this term needed to be reevaluated. And today I'm going to do just that. I'm submitting to you my findings that if oppression is a living organism, when's the last time we dissected its parts? It brought me back to a time when I used to work in retail. If you've been there, then you understand it is long hours, long days, long nights, and tonight wasn't any different. After a really long shift, a coworker and I decided to go and get a bite to eat. We thought that we would go to our favorite wing spot because it was going to be quick, fast, in a hurry. So as we sat down in the booth, reviewing the menu, figuring out what combo we were going to get, the waitress approaches the booth. And when she did, I immediately felt uncomfortable. She looked like my mother. Not because she favored her in likeness, but because she was old enough to be my mother. Thoughts started circulating in my mind like, why is she here? And is this the time when I tell her that I want the sauce on the side and the lemon pepper seasoning I actually don't like on my chicken, but I love it on my fries? Yes, I'm one of those. But before I could get out my order, she looked at me and said, honey, scoot over. Before I could say no, I slid myself to the left and she plopped down right next to me. And when she did, she let out the biggest sigh. Something like a... At this moment, I look across at the booth at my coworker, trying to read the look on her face. It was something between confused, irritated, and she was definitely still hungry. The waitress said, thank you so much for scooting over. She just needed to rest her feet. That she had actually been working a double shift, and that wasn't anything new. That unfortunately, after the passing of her husband, she's been forced to work double and triple shifts just to make ends meet. She went on to talk about how much love there was between them and all of the memories that they had shared. But she was devastated to learn about the amount of debt that they were in. When I think about the first part of this dissection, I think about the body. It's the easiest way for me to see if there's irritation or infection, at least on myself. So when I think about the body of oppression, I think about what it looks like to me. A list of unfortunate circumstances, situations that may not have necessarily been our fault, not because we made any wrong choices or decisions, but we're left with the traumatic experiences of our past, and unfortunately, the triggers that follow them. As I sat there a little bit longer, just resting on what oppression looked like to me, I asked myself the question, how has this diagnosis been allowed to function for so long? I mean, oppression isn't a new term. But yet this is something that has gone from woman to woman, from city to city, from state to state, from country to culture. Like it just flowed, like blood does through your veins. It brought me back to the booth with my coworker. As the waitress gets up to go put in our order, I'm ready. I'm like, we're about to debrief about what just transpired. But before I could get out my thoughts, she definitely gave me some of hers. She thought that it was super unprofessional of this waitress to not only ask to have a seat, but to actually take a minute and rest her feet. She thought it was inappropriate for her to sit down at the table with us as if we were friends. Oh, and that sigh, that was dramatics. I saw the words coming out of her mouth, but I just didn't have a response. I was confused. Don't get me wrong. I really liked my coworker. We shared a lot of laughs, but we both sat in the same booth, listening to the same story about this woman's loss of her husband, about the physical, mental, emotional, and financial suffering that she was in. And yet we came to two different conclusions. It made me think that the blood of this diagnosis is a misunderstanding of other people's traumatic past. It's the minimizing of their triggers. And unfortunately, attaching labels to that misunderstanding. Words like inappropriate, unprofessional, dramatic. I have to be honest with you, as I sat in that booth, I was no longer hungry. I felt helpless for her in that moment. It brought me to one of my favorite quotes from the late Maya Angelou. She said, "People will forget what you did to them. People will forget what you said to them. But people will never forget how you made them feel." I stand here over a decade later, remembering how I felt on that day. I remember how I felt when she came over to the booth and reminded me immediately of my mother. I remember how I felt when she asked me to slide over so she could sit down. And I definitely remember how I felt when I heard that sigh. But more importantly, I remember the response my coworker had to her story. I remember the lack of empathy and compassion in that moment. We can blame it on the hunger pains, but it brought me back to my research. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, so I went to the cells. Cells are really important. There's lots of them. Two specifically. The white blood cells' primary role is to protect the body at all costs. Protect the body from deadly viruses, toxins, diseases. Protect the body. Where the red blood cells, their primary role is to get oxygen to our lungs, to help us breathe. Now that's important, a whole lifeline. So as I sat there doing my research, I asked myself the question, how am I protecting the body? And have I been the best lifeline, not just to myself, but for everyone around me? Today I submit to you an alternative treatment. Because whatever we've been prescribed, child, it ain't working. So today I just want to say a little bit more kindness, patience, empathy, compassion, a whole lot of love. And dare we not forget understanding. Quickly, my research went from definition to diagnosis to now a full-on declaration, making a decision to no longer allow the most painful parts in our body to go untreated. No longer waiting until that pain and suffering is unbearable, that we're busting at the seams. Making sure that we are not only being a lifeline, but we're relying on our lifelines. one of my closest lifelines asked me a question. I never thought a question could be medication, but when these 3 words were released from their mouth, I immediately felt an ease, a release of the pain and suffering and abuse that I experienced in my lifetime. I immediately felt a supportive space to be able to share and be transparent and vulnerable about the triggers that I had picked up along the way. So today I'm going to ask you the same question. I'm believing that these 3 words are going to have a similar effect on you. Walking away knowing that you're a lifeline. So today I ask, how's your heart? I'm Kashawn Milligan. Thank you.